I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Christine Thoma. Christine is a high school English teacher as well as a blogger, a speaker, and the author of God's Whispers, Your Anchor Through Life's Storms. I am excited to have her on the show today to hear more about her book. Welcome to the show, Christine.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. I'm so glad you could be here. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who you are?
Well, as you said, I've been a high school English teacher. I've been teaching for the past 28 years, which doesn't seem possible because I'm still 29. And
Me too.
I have a husband named Phil who I met at the zoo in the monkey section to a band called the Love Monkeys. And we met when did we meet? We met in 2001 and we'll be married 20 years this summer. And we have two adopted sons, Beckett, who's 11, and Gavin, who is 9.
Oh, that's amazing. So, how did you meet your husband in the monkey section? I'm so intrigued.
Well, I was having a really bad hair day and a pimple that day, and I didn't want to go out. And my girlfriend said, "You have to go out. There's this band. You love live music." And I'm like, no. And then I had this like little inner voice, you want to call it the Holy Spirit or God talking to me, which is also the theme of my book that I wrote. And it was like, you need to go. You need to go. You're going to meet someone important there tonight. I was like, really? Fine. So I went and I literally saw him like in the monkey section was hosting the band called the Love Monkeys. And I saw him from literally like out of a movie scene. Like I saw him from across the crowded room and there he was. And my friend's like, he's checking you out. I'm like, no, he's not. And he came over and he's like, how should I wear my hat? And he was kind of acting all cute. And I'm like, okay, this guy is kind of nerdy. I like this. He doesn't know how to wear his hat, but he's actually not nerdy at all. He's a really cool guy. And from there, we just started talking and dancing, and we had these really deep conversations. He had just lost a friend to melanoma, which was unusual at age 25. And I had just lost my best friend in a motorcycle accident. And so we had this deep conversation about life and death and living life to the fullest and finding someone who's Christian. And from there, we just hit it off, and he gave me his number. And I said, well, I'm not going to call you because I don't call guys. And he's like, what? And he had never been like, girls chase him. He's a really good looking guy.
Yeah.
And I think that is what won him over because I wasn't like jumping all over him. So
Yeah.
that's how we met.
Oh, I love that. What a good story. And I'm sure your sons, do you tell them that? They probably think that's funny.
I think it's funny.
Yeah. So, well, being a high school English teacher, I imagine that you did some writing in your life previously before you wrote the book. But did you always have an idea that you wanted to be a writer?
Yes and no. Back in elementary school, I was always into writing in my journals, and I had pen pals from all over the United States. I wrote my cousins, I wrote my grandma who lived 2 hours away in Illinois, and I had a pen pal in Australia, and I just thought it was so neat. Like, I think that taught me to write to an audience. Like, they were excited to get my letters, and we would trade smelly stickers through the mail and all these different things. And it was just really fun. And that's how I kind of think I developed so much of my writing. I just was writing to people all the time and always talking to people too. Yeah. And as time went on, I remember like 3rd grade-ish, I wrote this story about a UFO and going to space. And my uncle was a famous rocket scientist at NASA.
Wow.
He got honored by like President Nixon and helped the magic triangle, figured out the math, like to get them back to space. So he was a really interesting guy. But I wrote a story about outer space and meeting aliens, and it was very fictional. But my dad read it and he's like, wow, you could be a writer. And that was the first time I thought about that. I'm like, could I? I don't know. And from there, like I actually didn't think I was very smart going through school. I was kind of labeled in the Bluebird group and wasn't in the high reading group. And it's because I was bored. I didn't know. And finally, I tricked some teachers in 8th grade and tried for once. And she said, you're a writer. You need to go to this other group. You need to be in this honors group. I'm like, I'm a writer? Really? And so I started thinking like, really, this is interesting. So when I started high school, after going to a parochial school, it was just kind of interesting because I'm like, I'm going to trick all these people and I'm going to try and I'm going to see what happens. And I started getting A's on writing. And then this writing teacher took me under her wing and said, "You're going to be a teacher someday." I'm like, "No, I'm not." She goes, "Yes, you are." I'm like, "No, teachers make no money. There's no way I'm going to do that. I'm going to go own a business and work for Nike and write advertisements." And she's like, she laughed and she's like, "Okay." She's like, "Whatever."
Yep.
I ended up being the school copy editor. And then when I went off to UW-Madison, I ended up for a side job. I was a publications manager for the school newspaper. And so I was always doing kind of writing things. And I just really liked writing, I guess. So I didn't really believe I was going to write a book until 2001. I was in church and the pastor's giving the sermon about how God talks to people. And I'm like, well, this is interesting. I'm like, something's always talking to me. I just called it my intuition, but he was
Sure.
talking about the Holy Spirit doing it. And I was like, huh. And then literally in the middle of the sermon, I hear this voice in my head, not a real voice, of course, but said, listen really carefully. You're going to write this book about all the ways I talk to you through some seriously challenging times you're going to have. And you're going to write this book that's going to help others. So pay attention. And I was like, whoa. And
Wow.
and my husband, who I was dating at the time, he stuck with me, the one from the zoo. And and he heard a message from God in that sermon saying, "You're going to marry this woman and you're going to make sure she writes this book and you're never going to let her give up on it." And right after church, we both went to the Barnes and Noble. He's like, "I need to buy you this journal." I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Because you're going to fill a bunch of these up." I'm like, "Wait,
Wow.
God just told me I was going to write this book." And he's like, "Really?" He told me I have to make sure you write the book. I'm like, "Okay, this is weird."
I have the chills right now. Oh my
So
gosh.
that was 2001. So this is how long it's taken. And I literally filled up journals. I don't even know the exact count, but probably 10 to 15 journals of just writings of all the things that would happen and quotes and reading books and getting ideas and having it all kind of come together. And did I believe at times I just threw the book away and let it sit for a year and didn't even touch it. I'm like, this isn't happening. And I would kind of challenge God and say, like, well, if you really want it to happen, send someone to help me. And all of a sudden someone would show up and be like, "Oh, here, I know exactly how to help you." And I'm like, "Okay." And they'd give me an idea and then I'd get going again. And, or if I didn't think I was going to write it and I said no to God, like, "No, I'm not writing this," I'd be woken up at 3 a.m. with an idea and a dream. And he'd say, "Go write this down. Here's the answer to that problem in that chapter. Here's how I handle it." And I couldn't go back to sleep until I wrote it down. So the book
Yeah.
kind of had to get written because we just needed to be stopped being woken up at 3 a.m.
No, I love that because what I find so impressive is I have these moments in my spiritual life that I am like, am I not listening to God? Right? Like there's those moments of silence too where you don't always hear, like what you
Yes,
said,
totally.
that push. And so there's moments when I'm like, okay, am I just not listening and I'm talking over him? Or is it just a moment when he's not, I know he's always present, but
Right.
he's not giving me a message at that moment. I just need to be still, right? Because I think there's some beauty in that too, but that's a really hard spot for me.
Oh yeah.
So being still, but did you ever experience moments like that in this journey?
Moments like stillness, you mean? Where he wasn't, where I wasn't getting those messages?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, all the time. That's just
Okay.
very, very much. It wasn't always like, it's not like I can call him up and be like, "Okay, talk to me about this." I mean, I can try, but it's on his timing. It's on
Yeah.
his, and it's his will. I had you'll see it if you look at the book, there's some chapters of where I went through 10 years of 30 miscarriages. I had 30
Wow.
losses.
Oh my
I'm a very
gosh.
persistent person, so I didn't quit, as you can see. And
Yeah.
I didn't have trouble getting pregnant, but I would lose it early on in the process, anywhere from like, 4.5 weeks pregnant to 8 weeks pregnant. And I
Wow.
just kept trying and trying different things, even to the point of IVF. And in that time, God was silent and I was losing my mind. And
Yeah.
and every once in a while, he would talk, or I'd get a message, or I'd get a sign. But there were times where it was super hard. So I kind of show that in the book too, like his silence and his unanswered prayers for a biological child, that in the end, there was a meaning behind it. There was a reasons for it. And
Yeah.
and you kind of start to learn, he's always there and he's carrying you in those times. He doesn't always talk.
Yeah. Wow, what an emotional journey for you with that. Um, I've kind of tried to switch the script a little bit when I experience some emotional difficulties or grief or things like that. It's helped me recently to say, like, God, what are you trying to teach me in this
Yes.
moment? What am I, because it for me it kind of gives purpose to the pain.
Yeah. That's the whole reason for my book, to help other people. I want purpose
Yeah,
for that. Yeah. But
yeah,
there was a point where I changed the prayer, and it was like, it's not about what I want. It's about, bless me with your will. Like,
yeah,
tell me, if it's not in the cards for me to be a biological mother, then help me accept that and take the desire away so that I don't keep having this need to be a mother. And
yeah,
and if it's meant for me to be a mother, then let this adoption happen. Tell me to go on that path. And eventually there were signs that would just pop up. It's like kind of like bright lights shining, like, yeah, you're gonna go on that path. Like, there'd be people who would say, when we were looking for the adoption agency and if that was the right thing, all in one day, 3 different people who we didn't know, they were like friends of friends, just like would randomly call or email, or someone would say, oh, I got in touch with so and so and they use this agency. And ironically, or not ironically, it was the same agency, Adoption Angels in Texas. What are the chances that 3 people on one day would
wow,
get that message that it's that agency that I should go to? And then when Beckett, our first child, the process of waiting for an adoption isn't easy either.
I know. So that's an emotional
And,
journey too.
oh yeah, it's a whole different journey and it's a whole different
Yeah,
card set. And when we were at the 1 year mark of waiting, I was losing my mind again. Like, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I
yeah,
was crying to God saying, give me a sign. And I look up in front of me. And a lot of times you have to ask for the signs and you have to really look, and
yeah,
not, and you have to be patient and you have to have that discernment. And all of a sudden I see in front of me as I prayed and prayed, I'm like, give me a sign, please. And I look up and I said, Phil, look there's a Texas license plate in front of us. He goes, don't read into that. I'm like, yeah, but look at the bumper sticker. It says someone in Texas loves you. He's like, again, Christine, calm down. I don't,
yeah,
he didn't want my highs would get high and my lows would get low in this journey. Cause
yeah.
I'm this persistent lady. And he kept it pretty calm. He's like, I'm not going to get excited about this. Well, the very next day, got a call. Social worker in Texas said, an adoption couple, a couple picked you last night at this time. And it was the time I saw the license plate and saw the bumper sticker that said someone in Texas loves you.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet.
So
Oh,
then when
that's
we were
amazing.
down in Texas, like, she was getting induced and we met the birth parents for the first time. I'm in a gift shop and I'm nervous as heck. So we're going to meet them and the baby's going to be born like in that day or so. And I go in the gift shop and there's that bumper sticker. It says someone in Texas loves you. So I bought it and got one for a scrapbook and one to give to her, told her the story, and she just loved it. And she's like, that's really cool. But it's
Yeah.
story after story after story like that in my book on all different topics. So
Okay. And do you offer, I'm imagining, like, any advice for us that maybe we don't give the discernment, or we're not listening, right? Or we're not open? Is there, or is it more just through example you're teaching?
I think it's through example, but I think that I kind of quote the pastor who kind of gave the formula of how do you know it's really God. And is it something that God would do? Is it godly? Because if it goes against the Bible or against God's teachings, it's probably not something you should listen to.
Yeah.
Would other wisely counsel say, yes, you're right on? So like, you kind of have to check it. And two, like, has it come up more than one time? Because sometimes if you keep getting the same message over and over, that's also kind of a sign.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I show too, like, through the different stories, it's not just like one way that God talks. Like, it might be different for everybody, but for me, he would talk to me through like the Bible, through other people, through songs that would come on the radio, through movies. I mean, I was getting messages through like through like children's movies and Star Wars. I'm like, are you serious, God? But it would be like the same message over and over about believing in myself. And I'd be like, okay, like when I was going through a
Yeah.
difficult like job situation or something. So like it was like even songs and movies and books, like quotes, nature, like signs from like a ladybug that would show up. And like my grandma used to call me her little ladybug, and she said, I'm not going to make it to your wedding, I'll be long gone by the time you get married. And then as I'm walking down an aisle, as she always called me her little ladybug, a ladybug flies on my dress as I'm walking down the aisle.
Wow.
And then my friend who had died in the motorcycle accident, right as I'm walking down the aisle, tons of motorcycles go by, and his whole family's like, oh, that was like a sign too. Like, just, it's like little things that you'll know what it means, and like you just like, it's just, you don't have that doubt. Like, and then, even license plates. We had lots of messages with Bible verses on license plates.
Yeah.
So it's just, I just think when people quiet themselves, everybody can get that discernment and that intuition and that Holy Spirit talking to them. And what's been really cool is there's been some agnostics who read my book who've walked away saying, I'm not agnostic anymore. Like, I see these signs that you're talking about, and there's something to it. And I'm like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And just opening their heart, right? To be open to that being a possibility, I think is really cool.
Exactly.
Do you still, so obviously this was your journey. You wrote this, I think you published it late last year, right? Late 2022?
Yeah, it came out December 7th. Well, it was like a little bit before that, but I got my first copy in my hands on December 7th.
Okay. All right. And then, so obviously this was your journey was it over this 20 years time span? Okay.
It was.
All right. And then I'm imagining you're still getting these signs, right? But now you have your book published. So
I am. And I have ideas for a second book. Like, people are now starting to come to me telling me how they see God working in their life. Everyone's like wants to share their stories with me, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to do like a chicken soup for the soul, like a second book of like other people's stories with me kind of editing them and putting them together along different themes.
Yeah, or you could do a little podcast of all this. That would be cool.
My spare time, maybe.
Yeah. So, and then have your children read this book?
You know, they haven't read it cover to cover. I mean, they're 9 and 11, but they read the chapters about them, and they were fascinated by it. I mean, there is one where Gavin, like, we talked about him pooping. I don't remember why. It was really funny, but he's like, my gosh, my poops are famous. Like, I was reading about how I farted and how I'm like, great, that's what you got out of my book.
Sounds very typical of a 9-year-old boy, right? That's your youngest.
but Beckett was intrigued by his story about how hard it was to get him to become our son. And then Gavin, my second child, he had a lot of health issues when he was born, and he's a miracle baby. Like, he had a hole in his heart, his kidney was malformed, his hearing wasn't there in one ear. He had a genetic mutation that if he would have had the other copy of the gene, he was going to die by age 1. And so we had the whole church praying for him, and all of these things went away, except for he had something called asymmetrical crying facies syndrome, which means his lower lip muscle never formed properly. And when you have that, you often have all these other things wrong, like Down syndrome, autism. He has none of that. He's actually kind of a gifted child and very athletic and social and very normal boy. And just a gift he's just amazing. But he read that chapter. He never knew those stories. He's like, wow, I'm really special. I'm like, okay, don't get a big head, but yes, you are. I'm like, God did some miracles with you.
That is so sweet. So are you still getting woken up at 3 a.m. with messages?
Yes. Yes.
So that didn't stop.
It stopped. It slowed down. But
okay.
It's now more about like, reach out to this podcast and market it here and make sure this person knows about your book. I'm like, so now it's more about like getting the message out there and giving the ideas of how. So
yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, I hope that this podcast will be another little way that you can get that out there. And
you're my first one, so it's very special.
As I'm talking, or as you were talking about your book, I'm like, I have so many friends that have had similar journeys with infertility and miscarriages, and I think that this is a great book that I'll be sending along for sure.
It's great. Thank you. I really think that population, it's Maya Angelou says, write the book that you need that doesn't exist. And this book didn't exist when I needed it. Like, I really needed to know I wasn't alone, and that so much of infertility and miscarriage is taboo and people don't talk about it. And I remember going to my pastor and crying and saying, I'm so sick of people telling me to trust God. It's like, I'm not trusting enough. Like, it's not about trust necessarily. It's about accepting his will and having faith that it'll work out somehow, and whether that's a child or not a child, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I remember like him telling me, when people have cancer, they have support groups and they have prayer groups, and people are really empathetic. And then when you have a miscarriage, they don't know how to respond to you, or they say something stupid. And it's just a really different journey that I lost friends along the way because they didn't know how to respond to me and I didn't know how to respond to them. And it was, people couldn't relate unless they went through it. And it was really difficult.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
hope the book helps people because, and it's not just a book about infertility and adoption. Now, granted, that's about maybe a fourth to a third of the book, but it also
Okay.
covers topics of like love and loss. Like I talk about losing my best friend in a motorcycle accident and my grandma. And I talk about the first chapter opens up with me going through a near-death experience. I'm
Okay.
in
Wow.
school. I'm in high school and I go through the tunnel and I think I meet Jesus. I mean, that's debatable, up for debate, but I believe I did. And at that point, I was told to listen to my heart and go back. It wasn't my time. And
Yeah.
ironically, this day, that song, Listen to Your Heart by Roxette, comes on whenever I'm having doubt about anything or not knowing where to go. It's like a sign. Like, and I show that throughout the book, how it comes on the radio at different times.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
the book also covers like finding your purpose. And like, as I said before, I didn't think I wanted to be a teacher, but I was meant to be a teacher. And like,
Yeah.
God made that very clear that I had no choice. It was like a magnet being pulled to that field. And same thing with writing, whether I wanted to be a writer or not, I was writing this book.
Yeah.
You know, um and I think everyone has a purpose. And I hope that the book is universal for people because I think God will talk to anyone and wants to talk to anybody, you know. And I talk about job dissatisfaction. I think a lot of people can relate to that, or having a health crises. I've had several, and then a lot of loved ones did. Like my dad had a heart attack, and I'd have dreams and get information from my infertility journey that helped save his life 15 years later.
Wow.
Like in my infertility journey, we found out I had factor V Leiden, a blood clotting disorder. And I remember everyone saying, "Oh my gosh, Lovenox shots, baby aspirin, you're going to totally get pregnant now." And I was like, I don't know. And then God said to me, "You're not going to get pregnant now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is that you remember that information. It's going to help a loved one later on." And I was like, "What is that about?" Well, people who have heart attacks, a lot of times it's because they have a blood clotting disorder. And when my dad
Wow.
had a massive heart attack, we're in the, working to save his life. All these doctors are in there working frantically. And they said, "Does he have factor V Leiden?" And my dad didn't know he did, but I knew I inherited it from him because my mom had already been tested negative. I said, "Yes."
Okay.
I said, "Yes, yes, he does." And the whole room stopped silent. They're like, "Do you realize if we didn't know that, we would not thin his blood enough and he would die in surgery?" They're like, "You just saved his life telling us that." I was like,
Wow.
whoa. And God had set that up 15 years prior for me to know that. Like, so it's just things like that that like
Yeah. So you probably had this moment of like, oh, now I see, right? Of
now I see
15
why
years.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of like correlations and stories that kind of overlap like that where you figure it out later on.
Oh, I love that. Okay. And I know you told me, but we'll tell the listeners it's available on Amazon, correct?
It's on Amazon. It's through the publisher, also through the publisher Higher Ground Books and Media, but
Okay.
definitely on Amazon as well. So
Okay.
and
All
on
right.
and on Kindle as well.
Okay. So, listeners, I'll have the links for all of that in the show notes as well. So that'll be easy. Click. You can get there and grab a copy. What was the hardest scene or topic that you had in there to write about?
Definitely writing about the infertility, miscarriage, and loss, like because it was just so traumatic and
Yeah.
raw. I'm very honest about all of that, and I think that helps people see that rawness and all those things. And also, it was really hard to write about some of the losses of like my best friend Dan and my grandma who died. But definitely the finding the right words and being honest about that infertility and miscarriage piece. And I went down some wrong paths too. I met an energy healer. I flew all the way from Wisconsin to New Mexico to go to energy healers. And I'm not going to bash them, but I'm saying it wasn't right for me and it wasn't
Yeah.
bringing me a baby. And it kind of led me down the wrong path because I started trusting them instead of trusting God. And there's a place for some energy healers, I'm sure, but like it wasn't part of my path that I think I was supposed to go on. So it took me away from listening to God,
Yeah.
basically.
And being a physical therapist myself, I think that's a huge part of health, wellness, getting better is you have to believe in what you're doing to make
Yep.
yourself better, right? So, and that, like you said, could be run the full gamut and be totally different for people. But as long as you believe that is going to help you, that's a huge key to success.
Yes, totally.
So,
Yeah, but being honest just about the wrong paths I took was, I had to just like put it all out there.
yeah.
And that's not always easy to do.
Yeah. What a beautiful thing that your kids will have though too. I know you said, they haven't read it cover to cover, but I think of like the memories, right? That they'll always have this. This will always be there for them.
I hope so. I hope they treasure it. I mean, if anything, they'll know that they were prayed for and they were deeply wanted, and that God really brought them to us. I think they're a gift. And I think when I held Beckett, the oldest one, for the very first time, there's a picture of me looking at him. And I know they say babies don't smile that young, but he was smiling at me.
Yeah.
It's like, and I'm looking at him, but the gaze in our eyes, it's almost like I knew him. Like, I believe, and this may feel wacky to the listeners, but I believe I carried him all those 30 times I miscarried him. Like, it was the same soul I knew. And it got to the point where every time I got pregnant, before it was even confirmed, I knew I was pregnant. Like, you just feel that. I literally
Yeah.
started feeling like the egg and the sperm meeting. Like, it was just kind of, I just had that very like connection with my body, and I knew when I was pregnant, and I knew when I was going to lose it even before the blood tested.
Yeah.
So I definitely, Beckett as a soul would come to me in my dreams and talk to me about it all, saying, "Oh, it's not going to work. I'll see you later." Like, and like
Yeah.
that, I knew that soul, and it was that really helped me be very comfortable with the adoption, because it's not about the body, it is about the soul, and that was the same soul that was meant to be with me.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's so cool. Well, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing
oh,
all
sure.
about that. Do you have anything else you'd like to add about it?
No, that
Okay.
covers a lot. It's
Okay.
all in the
So
book.
yeah, so that was Christine's book. It's God's Whispers, Your Anchor Through Life's Storms. I know we are so lucky today. You've also prepared for us a book flight to go with
Yes.
this. But have you always been a reader? Being an English teacher, I'm imagining yes, but
Most people would think yes, but the answer is no.
okay.
And I was more of a writer than a reader. And I say that, but yet at the same time, my mom was always buying me books as a kid. So I guess I was a reader, but didn't consider myself one. Like, I was always reading like Judy Blume, or I don't know, any sassy teen magazine. So I read those, but I didn't really get turned on to reading until I felt like I was a good reader. So that was more like later high school, college.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay, and probably finding books that you liked as well, right? You could pick
exactly.
and choose a little bit more.
Yep.
Okay, so what type of books do you like to read now?
Well, I am an atypical English teacher. I love to read nonfiction more than fiction, which I know is unusual for English teachers, but I really like memoir, self-help, nonfiction, Christian spiritual, things like Between Two Kingdoms. I like Rachel Hollis, Brene Brown. I just got done on vacation reading Atomic Habits by James Clear.
I'm reading that right now.
It's fantastic. I like things like by Shauna Nyquist, Present Over Perfect, and then of course some of the books that I'm going to talk about today. So,
Yeah, this is perfect segue. Let's jump into your book flight today. What's the first book we're going to be sampling?
it's an oldie but a goodie. I really like Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love.
Okay.
Um, I feel like that's one of the books that inspired kind of my voice and the style that I wanted for my own book. And I love her voice. I love her honesty. I love her spiritual reflections. She's got a lot of like life aphorisms. And if you don't know what the book is, she starts off in Italy and explores eating and the joy of being in the present moment. It's just like so cool. Like, it's just a good reminder to live in the present moment. And then she goes off to India and she really learns like yoga and meditation and praying, and finds inner peace and a deep connection to spirituality, which again I think is something that's lacking in our world, or slowing down and taking time to think about what is that Holy Spirit saying to you. And then she finally finds love. She goes off and meets a medicine man who helps her find her balance, and she falls in love with this Brazilian man, and it's just kind of romantic.
Yeah.
So the whole book just really impacted me, because it kind of teaches us to embrace our passions and let go of what doesn't serve us. And she has some great quotes in her book, like all over the place. I remember when I read it years ago, like I'm highlighting things left and right. And so I love books that like make me reread it and make me think about my life and make me better. And
Yeah.
one of her quotes, she says, you have to participate relentlessly in the manifestation of your own blessings. And I like that a lot. It's like it reminds you to take risks and make sacrifices and experience love and happiness. And she talks a lot too about like appreciating those small moments and practicing gratitude. And I think about my own story, like when you're going through hard times, trying to like live in that present moment still and not be so focused on your future goal.
Yeah.
And trying to just really show gratitude for even the joy. There's things we can be thankful for even when we're going through the hardest of times. And it's hard to do, but like I think it's important. And that book kind of helped me do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it helps, I think, change your mindset a little bit. Um, I loved this. I think this was the first book I kind of read like this as well. But I liked that you got to travel along with her in it.
Yeah.
Like you kind of felt like you got to really learn about the place and but also like you were saying the spiritual lessons that she was teaching you. And for me, as you were kind of saying that, sometimes that's when I read sentences in the book or the Bible, whatever it is that I'm reading, that's when I'm like, and I highlighted it. I just have this moment where I sit there and I'm like, this is a good message for me right now. Like that's God
Yeah.
sending me that
And
to
I had
me.
that a lot through that book. Yeah,
Yeah. So
totally. Another quote she had that I liked a lot too. She said, happiness is a consequence of personal effort. You fight for it, you strive for it, insist upon it, and sometimes even travel around the world looking for it. And it's like, yeah, like it's just you have to like you can bring joy into your life. You don't have to, sit around being unhappy. You can find joy right here and now.
yeah. And how powerful it is, right? To think that we can control. I mean, I know God is in control, but that
Right.
we can choose joy. We can choose to be happy.
We can choose our attitude to things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, how we respond.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. All right. Anything else you'd like to add about that one?
No, I just think I love her. Like as she writes, she talks to the reader, and I think that's so cool. And so I feel like she was like my mentor. She doesn't know this. I would love to meet her. I'd love to tell her this. But her writing style, I feel like I digested it so much that I tried to kind of emulate it in my own writing. So it was a big influence for me.
Yeah. I think in our last episode, actually episode 18, um, Madeline was talking about, I think she wrote another book called Big Magic.
Oh yes, she did. Is that the one on creativity?
Yeah, and she was saying how that inspires her so much because she is an author herself, and how like when she's kind of feeling stagnant, she'll go back to that. And so I'm like, oh, I have that on my TBR list.
No, that's a good read as well. I like that one a lot too.
Okay, well, great. So that was Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. And then what's our second book of the pairing today?
Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom.
Okay.
One of my all-time favorites. Again, another goodie. This was published in 1997, and that was the same year that my best friend Dan died, who I write about in my book. And it came out right at the right time for me because here I'm like 23 years old, and you think you're invincible. You think that death's not going to happen to you. And I think a lot of young people think that like that it can happen theoretically, but you don't truly like believe it. And when he died, a friend who I thought I'd have in my life all my life, we
Yeah.
were best college friends. I was just in shock, and I was grieving so deeply for him. And this book comes out, and just to give a quick little summary of it, you've got a professor named Maury, thus the name Tuesdays of Maury, and his old student Mitch, and that's the author Mitch Albom. They were student teacher in college, and Maury, he sees on a TV show that he's dying of ALS. And so Mitch goes and visits him every Tuesday, and together they write the book about the meaning of life. And they have several different topics in this book, from everything from death and marriage and culture and forgiveness, and it goes on and on. And I kind of modeled my book after that. You can
Yeah.
tell that the things I read a lot of influence me, but I divided my book up into sections like that as well. But this book really teaches you to accept death, to live in that present moment again, and to find gratitude, similar to like Eat, Pray, Love, kind of that same theme. But there was a couple of quotes in there that just changed me and helped me kind of put my friend's death into perspective. And Albom says, death ends a life, not a relationship. And that's so true. I mean, we know
Yeah.
it, but such a good reminder to me at that time in my life. And even now that, I still have those memories, and I still feel like Dan comes to me through, I don't know if you call it an angel or what, but he comes in my dreams and he tells me things. And I just really feel like that energy, those people who pass on are still with us. And so that quote just was like, it was almost like God talking to me through that book. Like, it's okay. Like they're still around.
Yeah.
And see them again someday if you believe in a heaven, and I do. He also says in that book, when you know how to die, you know how to live. Like if you really believe that you could die at any moment, you're going to live more meaningfully. And we know that theoretically, but how often do we really do that? Like you don't want to go to bed mad, or you don't want to, um, you don't want to leave things undone kind of thing. And so I always try to keep that in my mind. I don't always, sometimes you forget, but I think it's such an important lesson that I learned really early on in my 20s, and
Yeah.
stayed with me to the point where I've taught this book every single year since it was published, since
Wow.
1997. And when other teachers fight to try to move it to a different class, I'm like, no, 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 it's staying in this class.
Yeah,
And
please.
I've done a living funeral for 28 years in a row with my students, where they write compliments to every single person in class. Because in the book, they have a living funeral. And before he dies, he's like, I want to hear all the good things about me while I'm alive. Why do people have to say all these things that are nice when I'm dead? I won't get to hear them.
Yeah.
How true. Like, we need to show that appreciation to people while we're alive. And so I've had all my students write compliments to each other, and then we all sign them, and like they share out their 2 or 3 ones that surprised them or were funny or most meaningful. And then we bring in food and we have a big funeral
Yeah.
every year. So it's kind of become a tradition in my class as they read this book too.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. I lost my dad in my 20s as well, and it has really made me feel like these big things that I've done in my life that I might be scared or afraid to do. It's like you need to live your life, get out there. So that second quote that you gave, I'm like, yeah, that's really a motto in my world of just
mhm,
getting out there. You never know how long we're going to have. You never know if we have tomorrow. So just go out there and make the
exactly.
most of it.
I know some people like try to put things off to retirement. I'm like, nope, we're taking that vacation. We're gonna stop and go do this family stuff. And so it's important to live your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think. He has another famous book as well. Is The Five People You Meet in Heaven? Did he write that one?
He is like 10 or 11 or 12. I
Okay.
don't know. Yeah, five, that's a good one.
Okay.
And he just wrote a really, what was it called? The one about this guy on this boat. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, these are the
It was
only
like,
two I could pull, like from
okay.
memory. That's the only two I could
Yeah,
pull.
I'm horrible with titles, but he has some other fantastic books. He has one about it. He adopted a daughter named Chica, and he wrote about that. And I have one right in front of me, but I haven't read it yet. It's called The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, that one.
Okay.
Um, but there's another really good one about a man on a boat, and it's hard to explain. You'd have to read it, but it was really good.
Okay. Do you have anything else you want to add about Tuesdays with Maury?
I just think it's fantastic, and it can, anyone at any age can take something away from it. And I think it's one of those books that you can come back to, and as you go through more life experiences, you're going to relate to it in different ways. Like most recently, I like his like where he talks about attachment versus detachment, and I think that's such a key lesson in life. Like, you got to live your life and attach to those present moments and really take everything in, but you also have to detach to things that, like, maybe you need to learn to let go or to forgive, and not hold on to being upset with somebody. And so like that pull of that rubber band of going back and forth between attachment and detachment, I think, is another lesson that's always stuck with me too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I feel like death is another one of these. It's not a taboo topic per se, but I think you see other cultures that, they respect their elders, and like the death is
yeah,
seen
I
as more of just a cycle of life, right? But I don't think as Americans we do that very well.
don't think we grieve well,
Yeah. And
or
so,
or take time to feel the emotions
yeah.
that should come with loss of a loved one sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah,
like I mean exactly to what you're saying with this attachment and detachment, right? Like let yourself feel. But, and it's not saying you totally need to move on. You can have that relationship and remember them. But at a
of
certain
course.
point, right? Like I had to tell myself that with my dad. Like my dad wouldn't want me to sit here wallowing, right? Like
Right,
he would want me to keep going.
right. Like, yeah, and Maury talks about that, and I think it's interesting the way he's like, yep, I'm gonna let myself feel sad for myself with this ALS, but I'm not gonna let myself feel that all day long. Like, I
Yeah.
need to let that go a little bit. So
Yeah.
I thought that's a healthy attitude, I thought.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to read this because I'm not. I think I've only read the five people you meet in heaven. I don't think I've read this one.
Oh, well,
So,
good.
okay. So that was Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom, and then what is the last book of our pairing today?
The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and that one is actually a fictional book, but the themes tie into what we've been talking about. And so when I read this for the first time, it's a fiction book that has many truths about life, and it's philosophical and a spiritual journey about a shepherd named Santiago who dreams of finding a treasure in the Egyptian pyramids to fulfill his destiny. And what's interesting is along the way, he learns important lessons about following his dreams and listening to his heart and trusting the universe. And again, this is one of those books that it's just filled with little aphorisms and like sayings about life that you're like, wow, yeah. And it's an easy read, but it's a deep read. And so if you take the time to really like think about it, you could be thinking a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, he learns that he's not searching for material wealth like he thought he was, but the realization of his personal legend and his purpose and destiny in life. One of the biggest themes is that we all have a purpose. And it kind of reminded me of my book too. Like when I read this, I'm like, this is fiction, but like every lesson in here is in my nonfiction book. And so I felt like it was like this model of my book. It was so weird when I read it for the first time. So he really shows how we have this purpose and that it's about the journey, not about the destination. Like we have to enjoy the journey along the way through all the ups and downs and learn lessons along the way. One of the points I think, again, like the other books I pointed out today, was about following your dreams, living in the present moment, trusting your journey in life. It really reinforced. He talks about listening to your heart, which again was what I was told to do.
Yeah.
And how everything happens for a reason. And he shows that like there's signs that and those people will just pop up into your life and help you on your journey if you let them. And if you go off course, you'll eventually get back on course because you're meant to do certain things. And it really shows how like there's nothing is a coincidence. One of the quotes that I really liked in this book was he said, and when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it.
Yeah.
And like it's so true. And that's really what I try to show in my own book. Like how I think about stories that I wrote, like how I was supposed to be a teacher and how I found the right jobs at the right time, and just the way that adopting my kids kind of came into place. And then just writing my book, how people came at the right time, right when I needed them. And then meeting my husband, just how that happened. And then, getting health answers. And so it's just, we all just have to pay attention because the universe is giving us messages.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, even as you've been talking about your story and your book, you gave resistance to it too, right? You're like, you kind of
Yeah.
pushed back and you're like,
I'm
nope.
like, I'm not writing this. No, I'm not publishing. And after I wrote it, I'm not publishing this. I'm not putting this out there.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just how much this book you're saying, the universe conspired to be like, nope, this is your path. And I think sometimes even myself, right, I get lost in this sense of like, what is my purpose, right? What is my purpose here? And so I sometimes get lost in that, but I think that goes back to trusting, being patient,
Definitely.
that God will guide me, or, whatever you want, if you want to call it the universe, we'll be guided along our path. We just need to be open to it.
Exactly.
So
I truly believe that. And the more I see, all these past students of mine, I can kind of see as this, like, oh, you're going to do this someday. And they don't think so. And then they come back, oh yeah, I'm doing that now. Uh-huh. That's how it worked. And I went back with the coolest thing about this book was, after I got it published, I went back to my high school English teacher, the one who said I had to be a teacher, the one who said she knew I was going to be a teacher. And I had her for advanced composition and journalism, and Mrs. Cantwell's her name. She's now like in her 80s.
wow.
And I knocked on her door. I see her every couple years. And I gave her a copy of my book, and she was just really excited about it. So
Oh, that's so exciting. Has she contacted you? Did she read it?
she read it, and she did call me, which she's never called me before.
Yeah.
And she's, my maiden name was Nekas. She goes, Nekas, it's not too bad. I liked it. I'm like, thanks. She's like, no, I liked it a lot. I'm like, okay. And then she told me what she liked. And then she's like, now, if you want to revise it, I would have changed blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay. Thanks.
Ever to this day, a teacher.
Yes. It was funny. But she told me what I'm going to do on my next book. I'm like, okay.
Oh, that is so great. I love that.
Yep.
Okay, well, the third book of your pairing today was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
I think that's how we say it.
Okay. All right. I had one idea as you've been talking about a dessert pairing. Have you read On Fire by is it John O'Leary or John Leary?
I haven't read that one.
Okay. I think you would really like it. I talked about it in episode 3, so I won't go too much into detail here, listeners, because I've already talked about it. But he was burned on 90% plus of his body in the 1980s, when that was pretty much a death sentence in the 80s, because we didn't have the treatments we now have to have someone survive that. But he was burned on 90+% of his body. I can't remember the exact percentage. And it is his story about God essentially guiding him on the path.
Oh, wow.
And so I think you would really enjoy it, because it sounds kind of right in the same vein. And he talks a lot about those, he calls them inflection points, basically when we get that message from God, but really kind of being still, feeling silent, quieting the world around you to be able to hear those moments. And he's like, and it's not going to be these big events. Of course, like, of course the big events are there too, but he's like, it's these smaller ones that will really help put us on that trajectory of our life. So I think you'll really enjoy it.
Everyday life, just like sitting in the car, listening to the radio and being quiet. And all of a sudden you might get ideas that pop in your head,
Yeah.
It's like those pops in your head of like brainstorms that people just dismiss, but those are messages. Like sometimes it's that idea, like when you get an idea in your head and you don't know where it came from, like really pay attention to that, because that's usually something.
Yeah. And I've heard people call it like you've already mentioned, but like my intuition was kind of guiding me, or you were kind of felt this way. I think that's God guiding you, right?
Oh yeah, I think so. And I don't get into the debate in the book, like, is it God? Is it the Holy Spirit? Is it some other, like, whatever you want to call it?
Yes.
It's something to pay attention to.
Yes. I like that. Okay, well, let's end today with our speed round of questions that I call our bonus pairings. And these are just some quick questions you can answer. So the first one, are you a rereader?
If the book is good, yes.
Love it. Do you prefer audio or hard copy books?
Hard copy every time.
Okay. And then what is one book you have read that has changed your life?
Oh, that's one.
You could give us a couple, it's fine.
So many. Obviously the ones I talked about today have changed my life. So all of those, the Bible, The Little Engine That Could.
Yeah.
I remember 3 years old, my dad reading it to me, and he said, your initial spell can, because my maiden name is Nekas, C-A-N. And he's like, you can do whatever you put your mind to. And he's like, don't forget the little train. And I think that taught me persistence and determination at an early age. And that's helped me out a lot in life.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. All right. And then lastly, what are you reading next?
Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. I love Brene Brown. I've read most of her books, and so I haven't read that one yet. And I just got done reading Bittersweet by Susan Cain. I really enjoyed that one.
Okay.
And that I feel like could have been a pairing in here, just with the learning about grief and loss. I really liked, I don't remember the author's name, but the one who wrote Between Two Kingdoms.
Oh, yeah.
She's so moving, so deep, and so sad. Really enjoyed it though, and she had such beautiful writing and the way she worded things, and had these realizations about life too, and living in that present moment. And
that is a really poignant book. That was a great one.
That was a good one too.
So yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I appreciate your time. Of course. Yeah. I know your time is precious, so I really appreciate the time you've given me today.
Well, thank you so much. It was great. Great to talk to you.
Yes, thank you. You too. Thank you so much for listening to Christine and I in our discussion today on her book flight of books that talk about living life to the fullest. We'd love to hear what other books you would pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. You can also reach Christine on Facebook on her Christine Nekas-Thoma author page, on her website christinenekasthoma.com, or on Instagram christine.n.thoma. I will have all these links in the show notes. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are picking up next, especially if you have heard about the book on the show, please tag us. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. This is a brand new show, so if you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a review. Your review not only helps me, but it also helps the show reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure that you will not miss an episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.